Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. I can see we are quite a number of us. I think we are over 80 right now, and we are joining from different places. We were trying to share a video on the CARTA 2025 project, but it seems we're having a technical hitch. We'll be able to share it later on if time allows. But meanwhile, I want to invite you and welcome you to this launch that we are having of the DELTAS Africa 2 project, which will also include awards. We will be giving awards for 5 research hubs that we will be moving to the next level of conceptualization. So welcome, and I invite each of you to go to the chat box and just indicate who is on the call and where you are joining from. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who are using the chat box. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we will begin our session by getting an overview of the CARTA program from Catherine Chobutungi, who is the CARTA co-director and also the executive director of APHRC, that's the African Population and Health Research Center. Thereafter, we will hear about the DELTAS Africa program from Alphonsus Neba, who is also the program manager seated at the Science for Africa Foundation. We will then go into a period of considering the different research hubs that have been proposed, and we'll have Sharon Fon from the University of Wits, who's also one of the co-directors of CARTA, sharing with us what the research hubs, the CARTA research hubs, will be considered, or the description of the CARTA research hubs. Having said that, thank you very much, and I can see we have continued using the chat box to indicate where we are coming from. We have participants from Austria, from Kenya, from Uganda, from Malawi, from Boston, from Tanzania, from Gothenburg, that's Sweden, from Cameroon, from Tokyo, Japan, Somalia, welcome to this webinar, from Rwanda, Botswana, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. So over to you, Catherine, to give us an overview of the CARTA program. Thank you.
Thank you, Flora, and thanks everyone for joining us on this webinar. It's a packed house. Thanks so much for taking time to join us on this event. Today, we are thrilled to be formally launching the CARTA 2025, which is a continuation of the CARTA program that I'll give you an overview in a while. And very grateful and gratified to have reached this point. It was quite a journey to get here, and I hope that in the next 15 minutes, I'll be able to give you the CARTA journey so far and to appreciate the consideration of the Science for Africa Foundation And of course, the funding agencies behind this initiative for giving us this opportunity to continue the journey that we started a few years back in the CARTA program. So CARTA, as many of you may know, is the Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa. And we are now in a phase that we have called CARTA2025. And we believe that we are moving towards sustainability of the CARTA vision and the CARTA program itself. So, oops. So CARTA is an Africa-based, African-led initiative that was conceptualized to strengthen the capacity of African universities to produce well-trained and skilled researchers and scholars for the continent. And it was conceptualized as a 20-year intervention. And the conceptualization started in 2008, but we recruited our first cohort in 2011. So in many ways, we look at 2011 as the beginning of the CARTA program. And that's why we are going all the way up to 2030. That's when the CARTA program, we envisage that at least as it was conceptualized, it will be ending. We are now in 2023, so we are somewhere about 7 years to the end of the 20-year intervention, and we'll see how it was conceptualized and where we are and where the CARTA 2025 comes in. So the objectives of the CARTA program really was to enhance the capacity of African universities to lead globally competitive research and research training programs, and in a way build vibrant, viable, sustainable, multidisciplinary research hubs at African universities, and then create networks of locally trained but internationally recognized scholars. And this, in a way, CARTA aims to contribute to the vision that the African continent has, to have African scientists that compete globally, that generate knowledge, but that also use that knowledge and the expertise to support their governments and other initiatives on the continent to improve the well-being of Africans. So these are the CARTA partners. The C in CARTA is consortium. So it's a consortium of African partner universities that are spread in 5 countries for now. We have the University of Ibadan and the University of Obafemi Awolowo in Nigeria. We have Makerere in Uganda, Moi and University of Nairobi in Kenya, the University of Rwanda, the University of Malawi, and then the University of the Witwatersrand in South Africa. And then we have 4 African research centers, including APHRC, which I lead. And then we have Agincourt Population and Health Unit in South Africa, Ifakara Health Institute in Tanzania, and then the Kemri Wellcome Trust Research Program that is based in Kenya. And we have lots and lots of what we term as non-African partners. We used to call them Northern partners, but then we have a long-standing partner in Chile, and that's why we frame them as non-African partners. And all these members of the consortium play different roles. Of course, the partner universities are the hosts of the fellowship programs that we run. They are the main targets of the institutional capacity strengthening, but they also contribute resources in terms of the facilitators for the different interventions that we run. They mentor their students, but also students from other universities. They participate and contribute to the selection of fellows. And so there's the biggest really contributor to this whole initiative is resident on the African continent. And then we have the non-African partners that also contribute their expertise when it comes to facilitation, mentorship, training, but also in ensuring that we have a competitive selection process for our various initiatives. And then the African research centers play a similar role. They provide fellows, but they also host fellows who would wish to get hands-on training when it comes to their PhD or their postdoctoral program. So the CARTA value proposition is that we focus on public universities. And as you've seen, all the CARTA partner universities are public. The CARTA fellows and the CARTA community and graduates addresses broad population and public health issues from a multidisciplinary perspective. And we've done some studies and bibliographic studies which show that we've contributed significantly to the population and health research agenda on the continent. And we have a proven track record and achievements. We had an evaluation when CARTA was at 10, and it showed that we have proven record of interventions in terms of the production of globally competitive scholars on the African continent that is shown through various achievements that I'll show in a bit. And we also have established, matured, and trusted governance structures And the people who are part of the CARTA community will testify to the involvement and contribution and really inclusive way in which CARTA is governed that has helped us to create great buy-in and ownership across the consortium, and which in a way has been the driver of the success that CARTA has enjoyed over the last 13 years. And then a focus on program sustainability. I'll not go into the details of the theory of change of CARTA, but I just extracted a snippet which shows that we have skilled early career researchers as the beginning point, and we expect that these skilled early career researchers will establish research teams within their institutions, and then they will create a conducive training and research environment, and then produce quality research, scientific research, but also policy and public engagement. And then through a process that includes investment in the training and research environment, we will have research leaders at the end of this process. And the research leaders now will become the catalysts for a cycle that continues, where they support another cohort or generation of early career researchers who still go through the same pipeline and end up in research leadership roles. So we are very much focused on program sustainability, and that's why this CARTA 2025 is very important when it comes to our path towards sustainability. This is some of the examples around program sustainability, looking at some of the CARTA fellows now having received an institutionalization grant and then trying to develop a PhD curriculum at the University of Ibadan. So that is just one way in which this is being addressed. Our approach to impact and sustainability hinges on building a critical mass, supporting both individuals and institutions. It's not sufficient to capacitate individuals without creating the enabling environment within the institutions where they are. So we have interventions that target individuals, but also the institutions where the individuals are. We take a long-term view to capacity strengthening by training researchers and then supporting them to grow into research leaders. At the end of the day, seeing how they become change agents within the institutions. And we believe very much in an intergenerational transfer of skills, knowledge, and culture, a culture of excellence, a culture of mentorship, a culture of ethics, and a culture of recognizing the value of science and research and how much it can contribute to human development. So these are some of the achievements in terms of numbers. So far, we have recruited 245 PhD fellowships for different reasons. 20 of those fellowships have been terminated. And now we have at least 225 active fellows. But out of those, a big chunk of them have graduated, 145. So we only have 80 who are left in the pipeline. And out of these, 57 of these 145 graduates have received 73 postdoctoral awards, including postdoctoral awards within CARTA, but also postdoctoral awards from other institutions. So we have a 92% retention rate, and the average completion time is about 54 months. And this is quite impressive considering that our fellows are actually in full-time employment, either at their research institutions or at the universities, where they work. In terms of gender equality, we are very good at that. In terms of the fellows, we have about 56% female and 44% male, and a similar percentage in terms of graduates. 55% of our graduates are female and 45% are male. And now the postdoctoral awardees, we also see a similar balance where females are slightly ahead in terms of male. But when you think about gender equality, this is actually something which is quite impressive, that we aim to see slightly more female than male instead of us having it the other way around. Our fellows have published more than 3,000 peer-reviewed articles, and we have an impressive website where all this is documented. And the link, of course, the link is not active, but if you just Google CARTA Evidence website, you'll see the impressive infrastructure that we've set in place to track and monitor the achievements of our fellows and to profile them and increase their visibility, but also to see the scope and the scale of the kinds of work that they do and the networks and that exist within the CARTA consortium. Our fellows have raised more than $31 million in external grants, including at least 24 non-CARTA postdoctoral awards. And the fellows have been promoted and appointed to various positions within the universities. And a lot of them have been given additional responsibilities, especially after graduation. And there's an intergenerational transfer of skills and culture, which is hard to go into now. but a lot of the interventions which are aimed at strengthening the institutional ecosystem are driven and led by our graduates, but also the fellows. So when it comes to the strengthening institutional capacity, we've provided some awards to different institutions in the consortium, and most of these awards have been used to develop courses that build on the CARTA interventions and resources. And as you can see, the Obafemi Awolowo University had they approved the research methodology course that was informed by the resources from the joint advanced seminars which are offered during CARTA. And the University of Rwanda, the Senate also approved the research methodology course. The Makerere has designed a CARTA-based cross-cutting course that will be offered to all PhD students. The same with the University of Ibadan, and the same with WITS, where there's a postgraduate orientation program that is university-wide and is also building on the resources that have been developed through CARTA. In addition, we've trained hundreds of supervisors so that they can become good supervisors for their PhD fellows that are out in and outside CARTA, and then they're beneficiaries of other faculty and staff members who support research. And we used to call it the faculty and administrative seminar, but now it is a broad seminar that includes administrators, people in finance, people that provide ICT services, people that support the library, and all that, so that everybody understands their role and plays their role when it comes to creating an enabling research environment. So CARTA 2025 is building on a strong track record, a strong network, strong systems, continuity and momentum, and consolidation while addressing the gaps in the CARTA theory of change. And it has four elements. One is to maintain a pipeline of high quality early career research trainees across partner institutions by providing both PhD but also postdoctoral opportunities. It's looking at supporting the creation of research hubs at partner institutions, and you'll hear about that in the next presentations. And the idea is to create a platform where the fellows but also the graduates can continue honing their research skills and grow their research leadership capabilities. And then we are also trying to institutionalize aspects of CARTA to ensure that all the interventions that have been developed so far can become mainstreamed, institutionalized, integrated in the university systems, so that they can be accessed by more and more people within the different universities. And then to enhance the engagement of the CARTA community with society, because ultimately research should have value beyond academia. And therefore, we're trying to put in place interventions to ensure that the CARTA community, whether it's the fellows, whether it's the graduates, whether it's the supervisors, sort of embed community engagement and public engagement and policy engagement in their work, so that the research they produce can be used to support change within their respective countries. So today is about celebrating and acknowledging the contributions of everybody who has worked with us on this journey, and to formally start the beginning of the CARTA 2025 grant that with appreciation we received from the Science for Africa Foundation, but of course without forgetting that we've had past funders that have worked with us since 2008, and even today we still have funders who are working with us and are supporting different elements of the CARTA 2025 strategy. Thank you very much for your attention, and we hope to continue engaging with you, and we greatly appreciate your partnership and your presence in today's event. Back to you, Flora.
Thank you, Catherine. I want to also encourage the participants. You could make use of the chat box in case you want to put in a comment, and also you could make use of the question and answer feature that is below in the Zoom, your Zoom page, so as to ask any questions or seek any clarifications with respect to the different presentations that have been made. So thank you very much, Catherine. I'll go on to the next presentation, which is from Alphonsus Neba, who's the program manager in charge of the DELTAS Africa 2 project, or the entire DELTAS Africa program. And so I want to invite Alphonsus Neba to take us through an overview of the DELTAS Africa program. Welcome, Alphonsus.
Thank you very much, Flora. I'm trying to share my screen. I actually shared it with Anne. I'm not sure if I have problems inside, if you can share from that side, but let me see if I can try.
I think Anne should be having the presentation. If you're not able to, then we can share from our side.
Please do.
Just a minute.
Okay.
Yes, just a minute.
Meanwhile, I'll continue encouraging us to make use of the chat box. We have had many other participants join in from the time we began. And you could also make use of the question and answer feature. Thank you. Alphonsus, maybe as we wait for the presentation to come up, there is a question from Eunice Mutemi to Catherine, and she says, kindly advise how scholars in private universities can link, I think can link onto or be part of CARTA. So maybe, Catherine, would you want to take that up before Alphonsus?
I'll respond in the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you. Alphonsus, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I actually slightly modified the presentation, but the content is broadly the same. So to start off, I just want to thank Catherine for highlighting the various impacts and achievements that CARTA has achieved over the past years that it's been in operation. And to say that these results, some of which were like 285 PhDs, $31 million, 81 fellows promotions, and over 3,000 publications. So in a nutshell, this actually represent what the Science for Africa Foundation is all about. We seek to support. You can go to the next slide, and if you can put it on the presentation mode, then that would be lovely. Yes, so you can go to the next slide. So I was explaining that all these achievements actually, in a way, show what the Science for Africa Foundation is all about and is meant to achieve. So we are Pan-African, we are non-profit, we are a public charity that's created to support and promote science and innovation on the continent in order to help us as a continent attain our sustainable development goals through science. So the vision that we aspire to is that we want to be a leader in strengthening African science for a better future in a global world. And how do we do this? By catalyzing and strengthening African science and science ecosystems to positively impact life. Obviously, while we do this, we also value respect, we value excellence, we value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and above all, as a funding agency, we value accountability. Next slide. We do a number of things to achieve the vision and mission that I've just expressed, but we can summarize it in 3 key activities. The first one being convening, that we have a lot of challenges on the continent in various areas, and we know that the amount of funding that we can use to try to address these challenges are very, very limited, and therefore we always strive by convening experts and policymakers and other people who can contribute to help us identify areas that if we focus the limited funding that we have, we could have a lot of impact on the continent. We also design programs and provide oversight for the programs based on the results of the convenings that we would have done. And then finally, we mobilize resources to be able to fund the programs that we have designed, which would include the DELTAS Africa program. Can go to the next slide. So just click through, it's fine. Just click again. So we support programs across a broad spectrum that includes from discovery sciences, translational sciences, and implementation sciences. But all these programs that we support are structured around science, leadership, and careers, science, innovation, and translation, and strengthening research ecosystems. Next slide. We have 3 thematic areas: health, climate change, and environment and agriculture. However, we also have components that do with inter and transdisciplinarity, because we ensure that social sciences and the humanities and arts also inform the work that we do. And I think for this reason, the DELTAS Africa Phase 2 has a very strong component of social sciences with at least two consortia out of South Africa working on major social sciences aspect of developing critical mass of the continent. We can move to the next one. I think I've covered this, just move to the next one. So the work that we do, we hope that it impacts lives and impacts the entire continent in about 5 major areas. These include people, the whole idea of ensuring that talent and established science leaders, they emerge from the continent out of the work that we fund. We want to ensure that we have conducive environments that can facilitate quality science outcomes on the continent. And of course, once these are established, how they are maintained and sustained is another issue. And I'm actually happy that most of the programs that we funded so far, they have gotten into the rhythm of ensuring sustainability for funding to continue doing this. Then the next one being policies. Of course, the work that we fund, we hope that best practice can come out of it that could be embraced by a lot of policymakers and other leaders on the continent. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of products and services, being able to come up with all types of products and services, be it pharmaceuticals, be it new ways of doing things that could contribute towards sustainable development. We can move to the next one. I think I'll skip this one because it's more involved with what we do at the Science for Africa Foundation. So let's skip this slide. Of course, the work that we do also has a lot of governance implications. So we've got a very strong board, and maybe just to say that as a funding agency, that a funding organization that works with other funders to be able to implement programs on the continent, is always very, very important to address issues of governance, because without this, the funding flow could actually stop without notice. So we move to the next slide. So we have a very strong board drawn up from Africans who are holding very high positions in science and other areas, from the AU, from Oxford University, right here in Nairobi, and from Rwanda and Botswana. We move on. I'll skip this one as well. And then again, to highlight that most of the programs that we do at the SFA Foundation, they cover a number of areas. They include partnerships and networks, which are very, very important. Prudent financial management is also very, very important. Science communications is important. We can just click the next slide. And then monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning are also important. Grant making, very, very cardinal. And then diversity, equity, and inclusion, also very, very important. And I think I was happy when Catherine highlighted some of the achievements, especially in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of the CARTA program. The next slide. Maybe just highlighting the process that we go through in order to develop and fund programs. That we would normally have an application. We'll go through a review process. The SFA Foundation does not make decision on who to fund. We are actually assisted by independent peer reviewers on the continent. And I'm quite sure of all the participants on this call, there would be some of the people who have reviewed who have acted as reviewers for some of our programs. Then we set up the award, do the award management, close out, but most importantly, viability and sustainability. How do we receive additional funding to ensure that the entire process is repeated again? And the fact that you do it in a very excellent way that is open and everybody can see that is transparent makes it very, very important. We move to the next one. We've developed about 58 policies in various areas that help us in implementing the work that we do across the continent. Again, some of you would have been required to develop some specific policies in order to benefit from the grants that emanate out of the SFA Foundation through the APHRC as a lead. So we move to next one. So the DELTAS Africa program now is modeled after what we've called the hub and spoke model or network model at the SFA Foundation. So this slide shows you how we work with funding partners to mobilize resources, as I mentioned earlier on. And then the SFA Foundation now works with lead institutions and also requires the lead institutions to identify collaborators and partners to be able to deliver certain pieces of work. It's based on merit and diversity. It ensures that there's wider reach in terms of geographical spread and in terms of discipline spread. It increases networking, and then it has the whole element of bringing in independent advisory boards to be able to balance out decision makings within the consortia. This model has actually led to what we've referred to as balancing equity with diversity, because with limited resources on the continent, we're actually able to do much more. So let's move to the next slide. So based on the hub and spoke model, for DELTAS phase 2, we have, as you can see from the graph behind on the screen and the world map, you can see the spread of the DELTAS Africa 2 programs. I just wanted to highlight one thing, that if you look at the women PI for the hub institutions, you'll find out that without the hub and spoke model, we would have just funded just a few lead institutions where we would have had about 6 female PIs, 11 male PIs, just about 90 countries covered, and maybe just about 13 institutions engaged. But the hub and spoke model, like I just mentioned, makes it possible for us to then increase participation of female PIs that comes up to 42, male PIs come up to 58, institutions increase from 9 to 27, and other countries increase from 9 to 27, and then other institutions that are engaged increases from 13 to 61. Next slide. So again, just highlighting how the DELTAS Africa program is set up. We've talked about the lead institutions. That is an SFA Foundation grantee. It hosts the PI, and then it reports to the SFA Foundation. So the lead institutions would have a partner institution that would be a sub-grantee to the lead institution, and host co-applicants, and also reports to the lead institutions. And then there's a third category, which would be the collaborators, and these are institutions that would not receive any significant amount of funding or funding from the whole setup, but will come in with a lot of resources and expertise to be able to help in implementing the program. Next slide. Just highlighting the extent to which the hub and spoke model for DELTAS is able to increase geographic coverage in terms of more countries getting involved, in terms of more disciplines getting involved, and in terms of diversity and equity, where you define it in terms of access, in terms of access to maybe different resources, different supervisors, different categories of fellows, maybe disabled, and differently enabled, and just different categories of extending the networks in this particular area. We can move to the next slide. So for DELTAS phase 1 and DELTAS phase 2, we've been able to gather a lot of experience in terms of what the DELTAS Africa model is able to achieve. So I've mentioned balancing equity, just maybe highlighting a few, balancing equity with excellence, increasing intra-Africa research collaborations, having equitable North-South collaborations. I need to pause here to note that all the DELTAS Africa programs are tactfully designed to be led by African researchers and not researchers from elsewhere on the in the world. So by so doing, African researchers are able to lead the program and develop critical mass on the continent in that particular area. So value for money, I think I already mentioned this. The fact that we have state-of-the-art research environments that actually built during the program, critical mass in a number of areas. They could be fellows, they could be programmatic staff, they could be critical mass in terms of resources that are available to fellows, and then access to a lot of other opportunities, and then advocacy, just to name a few. We can move to the next one. DELTAS phase 2, maybe just to highlight the programs that are involved and the countries. So there are 14 countries involved in the, or 14 networks involved in the DELTAS phase 2 that are drawn from 14 institutions, 71 partner institutions, 35 partner host countries. The programs are led from Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mali, Senegal, South Africa, Tunis, and Zimbabwe. So as you interact with the CARTA program, bear in mind that there are a host of other programs that are part of the DELTAS Africa network that you can link into and have access to potential research, supervisors, potential labs, and other resources that you might need as part of your CARTA program. We can move to the next slide. And that's actually the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alphonsus. And that was a great presentation. There are one or two questions that you could look at that are on the chat box and respond to them. One is touching on the social science research and how do you foresee partners working with social science? I think for the CARTA related questions, Catherine has been responding on the chat box and also through the question and answer feature. And so as that goes on, we will give an opportunity later on for any question that has not been responded to be looked at for about 10 minutes towards the end of the session. But for now, I want to invite Sharon Fawn from the University of Wits, and who is also at the University of Gothenburg, to give us a presentation on what the strategy of research hubs is all about from the CARTA perspective and where we are at. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you, Flora, and thanks, Alphonsus and Catherine. I'm not doing a presentation. I'm actually just going to talk through, and I'm going to, I think, make 3 points and make them in 3 different ways. As Catherine's already explained, CARTA's been investing. We've been investing in ourselves. We are a consortium for many years now. And we know that there is research capacity in Africa. In Africa, by Africans, for Africa and for the world. And the purpose of these research hubs is to realize one of the aims of CARTA, which is once we have sufficient capacity, once we have sufficient know-how, institutional capacity, personal capacity, research capacity, and research training capacity, it's time to make sure that our African researchers have research centers where they can work in Africa, making the contributions they want to make. So what are the CARTA research hubs? Doing locally relevant research that is relevant to local needs, regional needs, to co-create that research agenda with the relevant stakeholders. So already beginning that engagement with community at the very conceptualization of the research, to produce knowledge and to produce knowledge makers. And then to link research with research training, to link researchers across Africa and to link researchers across disciplines. I see there was a question on, do you fund social science? CARTA has always been a multidisciplinary program, and perhaps reflecting on that, I was wondering in our presentations in future, if we shouldn't be talking about the number of disciplines that have been part of the CARTA program, from engineers to mathematicians, from political scientists to sociologists, from a textile designer to the usual suspects in health, the doctors, the nurses, the lab scientists, the natural scientists. So what does a successful research hub look like? I think that the most important thing for us is what I've just said, that it's multidisciplinary and that it's cross-institutional. One of the barriers that we have seen to developing a vibrant African academy has been the fact that we've, through all sorts of reasons, often pushed by funders, which is why Science for Africa is so important, because they're not pushing this agenda, but often pushed by funders, we partner with people in the North, and sometimes we value the North over valuing South-South relations. And for us, it's really important that we see much more intra and inter-African partnerships. And that's what a successful research hub looks like. Clearly, a successful research hub is one that's doing research. But for us, what's very important is that it is hosting the next generation of researchers, African researchers, that they provide a role model environment where research can happen and research can grow. So often during the CARTA discussions within our consortium and across us, our partners have pushed us to define and say clearly to each other and to ourselves, what is a CARTA research hub? Why is it different from a different research hub, from a different funding agency? And again, I think I'm saying the same three things again, but I'm saying them. Firstly, that it embodies the jointly developed values that we in the consortium have come to call our own, that we recognize and celebrate African capacity, African excellence, and African leadership. That we are the people who are conceptualizing and co-creating the research questions and the research methods. It's not something that has been conceptualized outside because of other agendas, but stuff that we know, research questions, and importantly, methods and approaches that are what we have created. And importantly, when it comes to the notion of transdisciplinary research, that we have also been able to engage with relevant stakeholders. And I leave it as broad as relevant stakeholders, because sometimes those stakeholders are government, and sometimes those stakeholders are the very people that government are ignoring. So if we think about marginalized groups, sometimes it's more important to co-create that research with those groups, but often it's important to work with government because they have the capacity to change policy, implement policy. And so that is part of why I've used the word relevant stakeholders. As I've said before, multidisciplinary, collaborative, and importantly, part of what we're looking for in our research hubs is that they have a system of developing institutional capacity. So it's not just doing research, but it's building their own capacity within their research hub, within their institution, within the lead institutions, across the institutions that are part of the research hub, to manage research and to manage researchers and grow the next generation. So that's to come back to what a CARTA research hub looks like. CARTA has a proven method of training what I would like to call multi-potential PhD graduates and supporting postdocs. Why do I call them multi-potential? The next generation of researchers are going to have to be people everywhere in the world who are able to work across disciplines, who are able to communicate their scientific findings to a wide variety of audiences. And that's what CARTA has done in the CARTA curriculum. The CARTA curriculum is a parallel, complementary curriculum to any PhD who is doing much more deep work in a particular discipline, answering a particular question using a particular method. But if you are a graduate in the 21st century and you cannot understand or read research that has come from a discipline that is not your own, then you are not going to be the kind of graduate that is required to look at issues of sustainability and development in Africa and in the world. And so we are looking to our research hubs to take those components of CARTA and use them within their hubs. And that's what makes a CARTA research hub a CARTA research hub. And those are the points I wanted to make: multidisciplinary, cross-institutional, generating research and generating the right kind of next generation researchers, people who have the potential to work with other disciplines, who have the potential to communicate with a variety of stakeholders, and who themselves will become leaders, and research hubs that will have the institutional capacity to be trusted places for funders to put their money, for governments, NGOs, other agency, advocacy groups to come to for evidence. Thank you very much, Flora. I think that's what a CARTA research hub is, and I'm hoping that that's what we'll see coming out of our prize winners. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon. I think we can now go to watch some videos. I'll ask Anne to put on the videos on the research hubs that are going to the next level. Anne, over to you.
Thank you, Flora. We are going to have 5 videos, each about a maximum of 5 minutes. And I'll just play them back to back. Thank you.
So I'm Charles Bago from Muslim lecturer in Makerere University, and I was CARTA fellow, now a graduate of cohort 3. So I'm leading the team as principal investigator. If we look at CARTA's mandate, CARTA looks at priority populations, and its mandate is in population and public health. Of course, through capacity building, training, research, and research management. So the hub we are selecting, the emerging and re-emerging diseases. First, it's addressing the bigger picture of infectious diseases. Like literature cites that infectious diseases are responsible for almost 10 million deaths annually, and 80% of these are basically found in Africa. So in order to come and combat this, we need to build capacity for this, in line with the CARTA mandate. If you look at Uganda and the East African region, we are at the epicenter of these emerging and re-emerging diseases. Examples of this, of course, include tuberculosis, HIV, malaria. Then we have yellow fever. We have the zoonotic ones like the viral hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola. We have the Congo Crimean. We have the Valley fever. So all these diseases have severe consequences. And Uganda and Rwanda at the epicenter of this because we neighbor Congo, and the Congo has reported, for example, several outbreaks of Ebola. Uganda has just recovered from an episode of Ebola. So this is why we selected this, that we need to make sure that we can predict and we make sure that we address these challenges as soon as they come out of these outbreaks. And also the re-emerging ones are spreading. For example, if you look at HIV, you look at TB, sometimes these pathogens spread in areas where they are not known to occur, or in areas where they have been controlled previously, but they tend to reoccur and increase in number. So our hub, we think that setting up a hub like this, first of all, it will help us to prevent these outbreaks by knowing ecology and also knowing the drivers of why these outbreaks occur in this region. Then also we shall be able to combat the spread of the re-emerging infectious diseases by also knowing the drivers and on how we can prevent their spread to other areas. First of all, of course, I said we know that our health sector is still weak. And in order to achieve this, you need also to strengthen in a One Health approach. That's why our hub is multidisciplinary, because we need the One Health approach. It cannot be done by one sector. Because if you want to strengthen health systems, you want to combat outbreaks, you want to put up good policies, then you need the different players on board. Our research hub is going to operate in having platforms. So we are having platforms whereby we are going to have different scientists, and these scientists we shall of course have senior scientists. Then we shall have early career fellows, and most of the early career fellows we are going to have CARTA graduates. So we have borrowed from the CARTA model in a number of ways. First of all, CARTA stands for capacity building through training, and in this training we have research platform that is dealing with research capacity strengthening and training. And in here, we are borrowing, we are going to post, we received a CARTA institutionalization grant in 2018. And using this grant, we developed a number of modules in Preparatory University. And these are some of the programs that we are going to have at the platform. Some of them, of course, are programs in scholarly writing, which are going to go to the early career scientists to help them how to write and how to communicate. Because we have Marjorie here, one of the CARTA graduates that maybe would lead this aspect. So we have aspects of research. We have a platform that's going to do research and innovation, and one of CARTA's mandates is of course to strengthen the research. So we are going to, we shall have the CARTA model of postdoc training and also PhD training or early career research training. So the hub would have postdocs attached to do research activities, and also we shall find that we shall have PhD students finding their areas of research within the hub.
We have an increase in non-communicable diseases in the sub-Saharan Africa due to a number of reasons, and some are like maybe physical inactivity and maybe changes of transportation modes, changes in diet, and maybe air pollution. And the problem that is coming in now is that most of the times people with non-communicable diseases would be managed using medications. And for us in the sub-Saharan African region, we we are challenged economically, where we do not have maybe resources for these people to go to the hospitals more often, because maybe they can't afford transportation, and sometimes maybe because the hospitals are not close to the places where they stay. So this becomes another problem for these people to manage the non-communicable diseases. It is therefore important that there are some other interventions that would be developed to help them to manage themselves while at home. And so we think that it's important to develop such interventions, and the hub would actually focus on the development of such interventions in the management of these non-communicable diseases. These would very much be community-based interventions. In terms of this project being in line with the global relevance, I mean, we have a global core to the management and prevention of non-communicable diseases, which is out there, and we think this hub speaks to that. And again, I think in line with CARTA2025 strategy, which aims at decentralizing some of the CARTA models to the grassroots, we think if we develop a hub which is based at one of the collaborating institutions, then we're cascading CARTA models to the grassroots. So we indeed have a team that is diverse, and we think we could actually use some of the models from CARTA in terms of strengthening research capacity. We would use some workshops in research methods, manuscript writing, for example, and grant writing skills, which would help to improve the capacity and strengthen the research in these institutions. And also in the early career researchers, we also want to strengthen the research we want to make sure that the research environment is conducive for the research that we're going to conduct, and we intend to use some of the models from CARTA. Examples would be like the academic, professional, and administrative staff workshops, which are very, very important in terms of helping all the functionaries to be aware and to be supportive of the research activities that would be happening. We also want to borrow some supervisor workshop skills, or some supervisor workshop models that CARTA is actually delivering. We think these would also help in strengthening the research conducive environment. We want to also leverage on the skills that we have already in some of the CARTA graduates. Being a hub, we think we could actually bid for grants, and we're thinking that we can actually use most of the CARTA graduates to bid for such grants. And at the same time, I also think that we would also involve these CARTA graduates in the trainings, like for example, the academic, professional, and academic and administrative staff trainings, or the supervisor workshops. We want to engage the CARTA graduates to be involved in training, maybe the training of trainers, so that they are at the core of the hub.
The burden of cancer in Africa is increasing dramatically and is anticipated to rise over the next 10 or 15 years. As the population ages, communicable diseases become less important. They're still very important, but less important than they were before, and diseases like cancer become much more important. And cancer is, as a field, lags behind the wealthier continents in Africa, so that prevention, diagnosis, and treatment is years behind what exists, for instance, in North America and Europe. We are essentially creating a new discipline linking infectious diseases and cancer to find new ways to diagnose earlier and to prevent and to treat cancers that we hope will level the playing field between sub-Saharan Africa and the rest of the world. And this new discipline, we feel, is very fitting within CARTA's objectives and mandate. It's transdisciplinary, it's innovative, there will be novel science. It will be a fantastic way for trainees, for postdocs to learn and to be right on the cutting edge of a new area of study, a new discipline, essentially. And our view is that as we develop the fundamentals of this new institute, which we call ADORE, we want the next generation of scientists to be nurtured within that institute and to achieve their career goals doing the kind of work we envision. Yeah, I think that the CARTA vision is so in line with what we want to accomplish. Our institute is new, and I have been charged with bringing together the various components to achieve this aspiration of making a real impact on cancer and infectious disease in sub-Saharan Africa. When I first arrived to lead this institute, I became aware of CARTA through discussions with the two co-directors of CARTA. And I realized that what CARTA is essentially doing is exactly what we want to do. So we want to build the kind of experience and know-how, expertise on research management and on the conduct of research, as well as the basics of how to apply for research funding, how to write a proposal, how to analyze data and translate that into publishable findings, but also, very importantly, into implementation of new strategies and new tools. We find that what CARTA wants to do and what we want to do is exactly aligned, and for that reason, we decided to apply to be a CARTA hub. And I think that what CARTA wants to do, what CARTA is set out to do, is exactly what we want to do.
The importance of this study, especially it will engage our partners who are very committed to create this clinical trial unit, and it will enable to conduct high quality clinical research at the level of the international standard, but also it will help us to develop and address specific needs of Rwandan patients by involving Rwandan investigators and provide the necessary training to support professional development for staff and fellows. Actually, when we have just looked at the theory of change, which has been established by the CARTA, we are looking at the hub under the clinical trial unit, where we will be building the capacity building activities focusing on training and research production. Especially, this plan will emphasize on securing funds from local institutions such as the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, but also international research funding agencies, aiming at strengthening and building capacity in conducting a clinical trial in Rwanda. Our stakeholders, I can say that they are in 3 categories. We are having non-African partners, we are having African partners, but also we have the national. So when you look at all of this collaboration that we have, we are going to embedding frontline stakeholders in stages from research planning to its conclusion with where we will be ensure clinical relevance to both patient and the healthcare system. Especially non-African partners that we have, they will be collaborating with us, bringing their expertise in clinical trial unit building and capacity building from the University of Belgium in Norway and from the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, where they have more than 60 years in clinical trial capacity building. So they will bring their expertise here in our clinical trial unit. But also we have African partners from the Wits University. As you know, it's the first university in this continent, and they have a lot of expertise in clinical trials. So they will help us to design, to train, and also to strengthen the capacity of our lecturers under the University of Rwanda, but also to build the capacity of the CARTA fellows as well as the CARTA graduate. And also when we look at the national partners, as you know, CARTA has just trained a lot of people here in Rwanda, and many of them, they are in different areas. All of them, they will be beneficial of this training, but also they will contribute actively to the strengthening and the capacity building of the clinical trial unit. So I can say that all of this at each level, it will just strengthen the collaboration and also the partners to bring up our clinical trial unit in the development of Rwanda, but also in if I can say also in the region, when we are looking at where we are in terms of clinical trial units here.
My name is Oye Goreje. I'm a professor of psychiatry and director of the WHO Collaborating Center at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. We are setting up a hub by the name of Scaling Up Youth-Appropriate Mental Health Care in Sub-Saharan Africa with scholars, with members from a range of institutions. The lead institution is the University of Ibadan, with other major participating institution being the Witwatersrand University in South Africa. And so we have the PI as myself, the co-PI as Professor Jane Gush. So our initial focus is on adolescent and youth mental health. Adolescent and youth mental health is a critical need in our region. Most mental health conditions start around about adolescent and young age. In fact, almost 50% of mental health problems start before the age of 25. And of course, young people who are affected by mental health conditions have a lot of associated disabilities, usually unable to complete education, to establish a career, and so on and so forth. As we know, our continent is a young continent, which means that
Are any of the teams represented in this webinar? Okay, I don't see any of them. Oh, I can see some comments. Great, we have a team. We have the University of Rwanda team, the Makerere team, congratulations. I think those are the two main teams that I can see right now. I also want to congratulate the other teams from Kamuzu University of Health Sciences, from University of Ibadan, congratulations, and also from WITS, congratulations. And we wish you all the best, even as you go towards the next phase, which is developing of the proposals for consideration of the research hubs. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we can go on to the next session, which is on questions and answers. I believe most of the questions that had been asked before had been responded to, unless there are any additional questions. And maybe as we wait for the participants to give any other questions or comments, maybe I'll send this question to Catherine and maybe Sharon. There's been a lot of questions around the area of government officials and non-CARTA individuals who can be able to join the consortium. I know Catherine responded to this earlier on, but because of the number of questions that related to the government officials being able to benefit from CARTA, or even being able to benefit from short courses, maybe Catherine or Sharon could respond to that. Over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Flora, and thanks everybody for the interactive session. All your questions were great. And apologies again for the technical hitch, and thanks to those who have returned. We've lost about half of the participants, but we still appreciate those who managed to make it back. As Flora has said, there were quite a number of questions about how to join CARTA, because CARTA is currently focused on a small set of public universities. And part of the institutionalization strategy is to ensure that things which have been closed to the consortium members, or things which have only been accessed by the consortium members, we are now trying to see how to build the capabilities of the different partner institutions So at first, initially to serve the CARTA community, so that different institutions are building capabilities to offer the many numerous interventions that CARTA has developed over the last more than 10 years. And once they do that, there will be the focal centers for offering those interventions within the CARTA community to begin with, and then perhaps within the same universities where they are, so that these interventions are available to a wider community beyond the current CARTA community. And then the hope is that with time, they become more available to the wider academic society. So if an institution is based in Uganda, they may offer the interventions to the CARTA community, then to Makerere University, and then eventually to other universities. So there will be opportunities when these interventions will be much more widespread than they currently are. Having said that, as part of the institutionalization, we also developed a platform that is online where we've put most of the CARTA resources. They've been digitized and digitalized. I learned that those two things mean different things. So with time, those resources will be also available to the wider academic community. But for now, we want to first see how they work within the community, and then once we are sure that they're the right resources and they're easy to use and all the hitches have been fixed, then these resources will be available eventually to the wider community. So that's another opportunity for other universities which are not part of CARTA to benefit from the CARTA program. Having said that, we encourage collaboration. So it's possible for individual institutions to reach out to the CARTA partners directly and form the networks and collaborations which are required to build their own capabilities around capacity strengthening. Over.
Thank you, Catherine. And maybe I'll send this question to Sharon on, do we have any other opportunities for new applications for funding? Maybe under CARTA. I think those are the fellows. Maybe Sharon can speak into that, and maybe speak into the whole area of, I can see Catherine answering the question I was just about to ask, but it was on the Anglophone, Francophone. Do we expect to go into the Francophone countries? And after Sharon has responded, I will send back a question to Alphonsus on most of the funding has come from outside the African region. Do we see ourselves as the African region, the AU, being able to consolidate funding for Africa? So over to you, Sharon, and then we'll have Alphonsus.
Thanks, Flora. I think the question around, do we have money for PhDs? CARTA has never been a PhD training program. CARTA has been an institution strengthening program and a program to invest in African research infrastructure. Part of that was training people who are already employed in research centers and in African universities to also get a PhD. And they have a very particular kind of training, which is one to take on the responsibilities, I think, of contributing to African development, both in terms of the generation of the knowledge that comes out of their PhDs, but also in terms of developing their institutions and the next generation. So from that point of view, we feel that we are slowly making a contribution to the general capacity of Africa to train PhDs better and more of them, and to supervise PhDs better. So at the moment, we don't have a call out for new intake of PhDs, but we hope that we will. Again, this will be consolidated and directed at the consortium members, and likely still at staff of those institutions, because we're really trying to build the institutional capacity for Africa's future, rather than investing in particular individuals, however deserving I'm sure they are. On the other hand, there are many ways in which people could be using CARTA. And I'll give you a few examples. It didn't come to fruition, but early on in CARTA, I was having conversations with the South African government, suggesting that they fund their staff to be CARTA fellows. And I think that's open to all African governments. If a government or an institution a research institution. We have had conversations with other universities in Africa, including private universities. We have had, I'll mention AMREF as an example of the kind of institution, who have said to us, we would like you to train our staff. And we've said, if you can fund your staff to join a CARTA cohort, we would very much welcome them. So from that point of view, we have, for example, what we call associate members. So I think the University of Ghana has been considered, certainly the University of Zambia. And the idea is that if we were running a CARTA cohort, then those institutions could say, we're sending 2 people, or 4 people, or 10 people. So that's another way of joining with CARTA. And actually, I would really encourage the kinds of institutions, if I think, I can only speak for South Africa where I know it well enough, but there are parallels in every other country. The Department of Health, the Department of Social Development, the Department or the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Social Development, Stats South Africa. These are all institutions which could say, we'd like to send 2 of our staff members this year and 2 of our staff members next year as cohorts. And we're hoping, in fact, to open up another cohort call in 2025 or 2026. I'm not exactly 100% sure when. But those would be ways of joining. Also, the other way of joining is that if you're a research leader and you say, CARTA has been contacted by a consortium for Horizon funding to say, we'd like you to be our training partner. And the idea in that is that we would come in and the Horizon call would include so many spaces for PhDs or postdocs, and they would come and join a CARTA cohort. So there are many ways of being able to make what we have gotten down really to a fine art. We're pretty good at getting people in, we create milestones for them, we support them hugely, and they get out in time. There are many ways for people and other institutions to put their staff or their students into the CARTA system. A lot of countries in Africa have bilateral agreements with funders, and we have been in discussion with funders who would welcome proposals from countries to say, in addition to everything else you're funding, whether it's to the UK development funding, whether it's USAID funding, whether it's Gates funding, whether it's CEDA funding, to say, we want this funding to fund X many PhDs to go in as CARTA fellows. And I think the funders would be open to that as well. So there are multiple ways that we're hoping that CARTA continues, but it continues from a demand side rather than a supply side. That you make the demands on funders and you give us your fellows and say, I want my staff, my student to be a CARTA fellow. And I'll hand over, I'll just make one point about African investment while I've got the floor, Flora. And that is, we did a survey among our own membership, the CARTA Consortium membership, and at least 20% of the money every year comes from investments from the institutions themselves. So while it's true to say that a lot of our money is outside of the continent, at least 20% comes from our institutions ourselves, which is African money, often from governments that are going into the CARTA program. This doesn't answer the bigger question, which I think you're going to put to Alphonsus, which I think is a very legitimate question. Thank you, Flora.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Alphonsus, over to you.
Thank you very much, Flora. That's a very loaded question that has been discussed, debated for many, many years, and we still don't have answers, and we still don't understand why. Like Sharon just mentioned, it depends on how you look at it. So African governments do actually support research on the continent, but probably not in the way that we as researchers we want to see. So I think we as researchers and African funders, like the SFA Foundation, would want to see African governments maybe putting in hundreds of millions of dollars fiscal cash for researchers to do their work, to do research, but we always forget about the equally hundreds of millions that have already been put by most African governments in terms of building at least the brick and mortar kind of investment, you know, the universities, and maybe some of the labs, even if they are not very well equipped, and then the salaries for researchers and even pensions. So all those are kind of in-kind contributions, without which I think we would be in a very, very worse off state as far as funding research on the continent is concerned. True that we depend a lot on Western money, and I really don't have the answers. We don't have, apart from that, we could maybe continue doing a lot of advocacy, not only within Afghan governments, but also the private sector, and even maybe high net worth individuals of Afghan origins, maybe especially on the continent. You may know that some of the money that the SFA Foundation depends on from Wellcome Trust, it's money that an individual bequeathed with strict instructions that the foundation be created to support health research globally. So as Africans, I think a lot of Africans have got money that they could equally think about that type of investment, as opposed to maybe just focusing on maybe just individual family interest and stuff when they pass on. How this can happen, I'm not quite sure. But despite what Afghan governments are doing already as far as funding research is concerned, I think we believe that there's room for improvement. It may not be in terms of cash. I imagine that we have a lot of challenges, even importing and clearing research equipment and research reagents throughout the continent. I mean, just a single maybe moratorium on just excluding all research equipment and research materials from customs duties and just facilitating clearance. It's a huge amount of money that researchers will be able to save in a very timely way in order to conduct maybe research on the continent. So we keep trying. We have, as the SFA Foundation, we've come up with a strategy, a funding strategy to try to see how we could advocate and engage with most governments and other Pan-African organizations to see how this issue could be resolved. Bearing in mind also that Afghan governments had committed to spend 1% of GDP to fund R&D on the continent, but very few have been able to even get up to 9, maybe 0.9 out of the 1%. So there's room for improvement, and it calls all of us as researchers, as institutions, to see how we could continuously engage our governments on various approaches that they could use, either to put in additional cash or, in terms of research expenditure, or at least to put in some policies that would remove some of the barriers that make it very expensive to do research on the continent. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alphonsus. And I think you've touched on something that each of us could be able to go home with in terms of how do we engage more with the government, how do we engage more and advocate for more funding from the region, and how do we increase the in-kind contribution, which Sharon had spoken about. So I think the responsibility will really be on us as Africans to be able to push this agenda to the next level. Having said that, I want to take this opportunity. I'm not very sure that there's any other question. I think all of them have been resolved. Thank you very much. I want to take this opportunity to thank each of us for taking time to be part of this particular webinar. Once more, we want to apologize for the technical hitch that we experienced, but we are glad that many of you were able to rejoin and be part of this webinar. We look forward to seeing the 2 or more hubs that will be able to go the next level of winning the Research Hub seed grant. And we also look forward to seeing the other strategies under the CARTA2025 project come to fruition.